Hello my friends and welcome to FISHTORY. I'm Alexander Williamson and today I have to give you a major disclosure before we start the video. Now I have to do this because YouTube and people have reported my videos on these subject matters whenever I cover the topic of bettas. So unfortunately there's a 2-minute spiel where I am going to talk about the details of this video and how no animals are harmed whatsoever in the making of this film. So if you want to skip all of this intro stuff, jump to the timestamp on your screen right here, and YouTube moderators and or algorithm content watchers, here you go. Here's all the context you need for this video. Thank you for watching. YouTube content moderators, if you're watching this, or the YouTube algorithm that sorts through guidelines and things, no animals have been harmed in any of this footage. They are being momentarily placed in a small container, just like a bag when you would move a fish from point A to point B. And this is how betta fish are bred, generally speaking. Now, I will be speaking as to a year-long project of peacefully keeping betta together in groups. This includes betta splendens. This is not a good idea for beginner aquarists, and I only recommend that species be kept in any number higher than 1 betta to people who truly understand the fish, have kept the fish, have bred the fish, and who understand what they're getting into and the nuances of how that habitat needs to be set up. Now, I have a historical context of keeping bettas and how these fish were unfortunately kept for the practice of fighting at one point in history. In this video, there will be no fish that are fighting fish. There will be no fish that have even been injured by other fish. I have omitted all footage of fish that even have any sort of injury whatsoever, whether it be caused by the tank or another fish. But these fish are happy and healthy, and I am explaining the context of how historically these fish are thought to be violent, and it turns out that many of these fish are actually quite peaceful. So I'm explaining the wild behavior and the natural behavior of these fish and why they are so misunderstood in the aquarium hobby. With that being said, there are some historical photos where I discuss that these fish were bred for the purpose of being fought. However, all images depicted do not show any sort of animal being injured or harmed. They are simply fish at a market that historically used to use fish for that purpose in the long run. All the photos even are black and white, and no fish are together in the same tank. Just to make that completely clear. YouTube has taken down this video too many times. They've given me strikes and they will not respond to what's going on. So I hope this warning will suffice. I'm sorry I had to be so thorough. But let's get into the normal content. Oh my gosh, guys, look at this. It is a 2.5 gallon aquarium with 5 bettas, including 2 males and 3 females. Now, this is a betta mahachiensis. And so are these ones. And right now they're feeding. This is the closest they'll ever get. Here comes another one of the males. And you'll see he will flare. Now, will I advocate putting 5 adult bettas in a filterless 2.5 gallon tank? Yeah, actually I will. These bettas, look how beautiful this male is. He's doing great. He's not missing any chunks of his fins or anything. The females are doing well, and the other male is doing well. And they actually have one section where the male has set up a nest. Now, I'm doing this because this is how the betta mahachiensis often nest in the wild. But I would not recommend this with many other bettas, betta splendens. These are not the bettas from the aquarium hobby that you'd usually get at the store. These are a very different wild species. And I'm able to keep 5 of them in a container. And they like to spawn this way. It encourages them to spawn to have competition amongst the males. Because one male will flare his gills and color up, and the other males will all simply color down. They will not fight. However, different betta species are very different. This betta compuncta malak is a different example. Look how large this fish is, and he's got a real bulldog-shaped mouth and can do a lot of damage with his mouth if he turns around and decides to attack, for instance, his female. but they're in a 20 long tank as opposed to the little 2.5 gallon tank here. Now, these that living in the 2.5 gallon tank, I don't let them live in this their entire lifespan. I actually put them in this to spawn so I can get fry. Once they spawn, I move the adults. And the same is true down here of my other 2.5 gallon tank that has, yet again, 5 bettas in it, and it has an entire nest that's right now currently full of baby betta eggs right back there. We can see a few of them right now. Here is one of them coming forward, and there's another one down in the substrate right to the bottom here. But these are fish that wants to live in a community because they live in flooded forests and they live fairly close to one another, usually in only 1 to 5 inches of water. Hence, that's why they are spawning right now, and it being very warm in the tank. In fact, a lot of these tanks, I allow the water to evaporate down and the TDS to go up, and then I'll add water with a much lower dissolved mineral content and a cooler temperature so that it mimics the wet season. And that's what I did here in order to get these bettas to also spawn. Here you can see none of these fish are all torn up. They're not fighting and they're not physically hurting each other. But there are some major exceptions to this, and years of experience that I have had before me, before I tried this out, before I started breeding fish this way. And I've had mentors from all over the world that I've watched videos from and asked questions of to understand what's going on and to understand the behavior of all these very different species of bettas. Now, when we're talking about betta splendens, which I have a whole video on, yes, you can keep multiple adult betta splendens in a community tank if it's well planted, the lines of sight are all broken up, and the fish are of a good temperament. However, it can go wrong very quickly, and as soon as one picks a territory, then you need to move the fish or remove the fish and allow that to be the hatching area, or rather remove the eggs and nest and let them hatch elsewhere. And that's why I always have a whole host of those tanks ready to go. So I can move them into these shallow, rice paddy simulation type tanks. I wouldn't just put a bunch of bettas together without watching them for several months first and getting to know, is that a really aggressive male? Is that an aggressive female? When I put them in a glass container next to other bettas, did they flare or did they actually charge at the glass and nip? Or when I put them next to another container of bettas, did they attack? Now, in the case of my tank that usually has the most bettas, this one here, now granted, it's only a 20 long. There aren't so many plants in this tank that, they can't see across the tank, but there are enough that each one of the corners and each kind of middle section is its own little territory. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand about bettas is that historically and evolutionarily, they don't want to fight to the death. In our hobby, we have raised bettas to wrestle longer and longer amounts of time. And historically, I've chronicled this in detail, talking about how sailors in particular came into Thailand and the city of Bangkok, and they wanted to see these local betta fighting spectacles, and they were not content with the fish simply tiring out and submitting. They wanted to see one completely become the victor. And it was during this period from around the 1760s up through the 1880s or 1890s that the plakat betta style was first bred, when they hybridized the Cambodian style bettas with these betta splendens. Now, I've gone over this in a lot of detail, covering up to the 1920s and 30s in a video on the entire history of the domestication of pet bettas. But needless to say, there's a huge difference in the fish that we think of as one species, quote unquote, the betta splendens, or what you think of as your pet bettas, and these fish over here that are wild caught first, second, or third generation bettas that still have their wild mentality of needing to cooperate, needing to grow up next to their siblings in a small, tight space, and also not benefiting from simply destroying and or killing the other fish, whereas they were incentivized to do such a thing by humans raising them selectively in captivity for many years. Now, simultaneous to the fighting bettas, there were also bettas being raised and crossbred with 5 other wild species from all around Southeast Asia to make a prettier fish. And while the Betta splendens is thought of as one species, it's actually usually a mixture of at least 2 or 3 species. And that may manifest in very different looking fish. So we have all sorts of different things that people have selected for. And while fighting is less common in the decorative Betta varieties these days, it still does go on, and there have been lineages selected for fighting, aggression, and that endurance, or how long they can fight for before tiring out and or sadly dying. Now, I would never advocate that, and I would advocate that you research your bettas heavily. Understand, like this Betta imbelis is a totally different fish, and when it's in spawning mode here, it is a very beautiful fish, but most of the time when they're not spawning, they're kind of a dull fish. Most people don't want to keep them. They're pretty lazy. They're extremely peaceful, and even the Mahachiensis up here is a very peaceful, kind of lazy betta. Just right now, because there's food in the tank, they're moving around and doing their thing. If you wanted a more active betta, you could get this grumpy bulldog-looking guy, or one of over 97 other species out there. So really, when we're talking about small tanks, we're talking about breeding, we're talking about numbers, it really depends on knowing your fish, knowing the species, and knowing how long they're going to be in there. Are they in spawning mode? Are you letting the water evaporate and get closer to conditions that simulate spawning, like in these tanks? Or are you mimicking a fully flooded tank that's well grown in and much more peaceful, less prone to having the fish trying to establish territories, and so many fish that literally the energy kind of cancels out because it's not 1-on-1 ever or 2-on-1. It's 3 or 4 kind of all confused with who's who. And usually one will kind of become the top dog with Betta splendens, our domestic Betta species. But remember, like I said, this is not usually one species. When they genetically test this fish, they find it to be a hybrid of many species. And a lot of times they have been bred for fighting for a long chunk of that lineage that is in their past. Now, whether that has continued until very recently and you got your fish, or whether it was discontinued 100 years ago and it was bred, for instance, by the royal family of Thailand or by fish keepers that were more interested in color above all else, that can bring out other issues like health issues and the formation of their labyrinth organ, or their ability to breathe at the top of the water like all labyrinth fish should, as well as, being prone to injuries and infections and things, or even the full moon or half moon. It's very common to see injuries and missing chunks of fins. Now, granted, sometimes that's a hint and it can tell you, okay, the fish have been fighting, but I'd much rather have happier fish that have maybe 1 or 2 scars from the times they spawned. Now, last thing I want to show you is just how different. That was a 20-gallon long tank. This is a 2.5-gallon filterless tank. We've got eggs in the tank, or at least they soon will be. We've got mulm on the bottom, no filter, no moving water, very warm water. And yet, look at all these bettas. The others look very good. Females, very healthy. So these fish I will continue to keep the way I've kept them for a number of years now. Same with the Betta imbelis or the api. There are quite a few bettas that are extremely peaceful fish that you really should, research, learn about the fact of when they're establishing a territory, when they're actually wanting to fight, or when they're false posturing and they're just saying, hey, get out of my corner. Even if, like in the case of these, those two are a pair, and they're raising babies at this very moment. So I'll be taking them out of here, or scooping the babies out of here, and putting the babies up with some more food, infusoria, or something that will give them a constant snack and protein source, along with a bunch of places to hide. So I hope that clears up just a little bit more about my philosophy on keeping bettas. No, most people shouldn't keep Betta splendens or domesticated types of Betta hybrids in a tank with males and females beyond just a small breeding window. If you want to do a sorority or a colony, you need to do your research and you need to know your fish. Here we have two males interacting very peacefully because it's understood that one is in charge. And even though it flares its fins, and its fins are much brighter around the gills, that de-escalates all the other males and females in this tank and says, I own those eggs whenever they hatch. And this female is the most colored up of all the females, so she's clearly the one he has claimed. But you wouldn't know any of this without thoroughly researching your species. And with over 100 different betta hybrids and species out there on the market, it's tough. And I understand why people think that this may be some sort of abuse, but it really is not. I know my fish very well, and at the first sign of injury or danger, I move my fish around, I give them space, or I change the number of fish in a tank. All right, you guys, have a great day, and I'll see you on the next episode of FISHTORY.